Welcome everyone to Beyond the Megawatt. We're your co-hosts Valerie and Mara, and we have two amazing guests here today. Today we're going to talk about the future of leadership and why it must be inclusive, bold, grounded in both action and harmony. I'm joined by two powerful women who are changing the way we think about leadership in the male dominated industries like mission critical infrastructure. Thank you, Lori and Andrea. Lori, why don't we just start with you and you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'd be happy to. I spent about 20 odd years in big business and Fortune 500s and up, and did a lot of different roles, both operational and program type roles, and also spent time in human resources. And that's where I ended up learning about coaching and found that it was something that I was completely blown away by when I had an experience with a coach, and decided I need to go learn how to do that. Because as an HR professional at that time, I thought I already knew because I was a little bit arrogant. So I went and learned how to do that, and now I've had my own business about 15 years, and I coach, consult, and I've also written a book, which is not directly about leadership, but indirectly, and primarily focus now on women because that's who I want to rise.
That's amazing. Thank you. And Andrea?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, my name is Andrea Janzen, and I am the founder of Ambition Theory. And we're a leadership development company focused on teaching construction and architecture and engineering professionals how to become transformational leaders. And kind of opposite to Lori, we started out focusing on women in construction. So, really have a lot of deep expertise, research on what does it take to get women into leadership roles in these industries. But as you talked about, kind of like we need to be inclusive, we're actually seeing an opportunity where transformational leadership is not something that we just want to teach women. It's actually relevant to everybody, and it's really what the future of the industry needs. So that's what we do.
That's amazing. So I'm just going to kick off a question. Now, this question is for the both of you. So either one can jump in first here. What was the moment in your career when you realized leadership, especially for women, needed to be redefined?
I'll jump in. And I would just say that being a woman and being a leader is kind of like dying of a thousand cuts, as that old example goes, because it isn't obvious when you come into the workplace as a young, naive, perceiving yourself as smart and capable and competent, and little things happen. And as I was thinking about this, one of the first things that happened to me was not specifically in leadership, but I was in a role in academia in the operations side, running dorms, if you can imagine, residence halls. So it's an operations role, and I had a peer that had come in and was also new. We had the same type of degrees and experience education, same job. He was a male, I was a female. We both went to the same bank here in Arizona to apply for a credit card, our first credit card for both of us. And he got several $1,000s more worth of credit than I did. And I was like, wait a minute, what? How? How did that happen? So that was my first real insight that the world might be different, and the only thing we could attribute it to was our gender at that time. So there's many, many more, but when you are in a room and you've said something that you think is reasonably smart and decent and applicable to the situation, and you get completely ignored by all the men in the room because you're the only woman, you start to go, am I losing my mind? Am I having a stroke? What is going on? And I could go example after example after example because there's so many small moments. It's not always a big, for me at least, an epiphany. It was lifelong over my career where things kept happening. And the only thing I could attribute it to, really doing self reflection, going, did I handle that poorly? What's going on? Was a gender type of issue. And it just repeated itself over and over. And the same with my clients, happens to them all the time.
Yeah, I would have to say that having been in the construction industry my whole career and even being raised by a male, I didn't have a mom. I lost my mom at a very young age. And so my father raised me from the time I was four. And so to kind of see like how even I was treated differently along the way, the expectation was never for me to enter into construction. In fact, the message that I received on a constant basis as a child was a man was a plan, and that I wasn't expected to go on and do these roles and have a what they would have called back at that time a male's job. And so I go, but it was something I loved. I mean, my dad was teaching me how to build a house from the ground up. There's so much power that comes with independence, that comes with learning to do things with your hands and not having to be dependent upon someone else changing your light bulbs or changing out your fans or installing drywall or putting furniture together or lifting heavy things. Like those are things I was really confident about doing. And yet I kept finding that my peers who didn't have that early exposure, they were kind of leaning away from. They really were saying, hey, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to stay home. Absolutely nothing wrong with any of those things, which I completely support, because it's a very special job that we all need, is having moms at home. But not every woman feels that way. Not everybody. Some of us are kind of ambitious, right? We want to do something more. And I loved working with my hands, and I love learning new things, and I love challenging my brain. And so for me, that wasn't a choice for me, like staying home. I wanted to move on. So I did notice that in my world that things were different. But I have also noticed that there's been a change. There's been more education than ever before, right? And there's this really big push about bringing the men into the circle and saying, hey, we know that you're not consciously ignoring me when I say something in a meeting. You're not consciously thinking, let me see how I can make you feel less, right? And it's just about education. So that's been my experience, just to your point. Yeah.
What about you,
And
Andrea?
Andrew, yeah.
So I have a complete, I think I love how this is interesting. Lori's story and your story, how you were kind of seeing signs early on that like maybe the world isn't equal. And for me, it was like, I feel like I had the blinders on until I was about 35. So I was always taught if I worked hard and believed in myself, I could achieve whatever I want and I could go after any opportunity and I would get it. And that was kind of how I was living my life. And then 2017, I was reading this women's magazine, and I used to live in Canada, so it's called Chatelaine, but it's like has recipes and like clothes, fashion trends, tips to clean your house, that kind of magazine. I was reading this magazine and there was a survey about women's ambition, and one of the stats was 2/3 of women would not take their boss's job even if it's offered to them. And 2017 was people were talking about gender pay gap, women's equality at work. And I was like learning, consuming all this content. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, how are we supposed to have like equity in the workplace if 2/3 of women are not willing to rise into that leadership role if it's offered to them? So that started my journey of learning. And so I love research. So I went down the rabbit hole of study after study after study. And one thing kind of that really stuck out for me in one of the original, like the older studies that I read, was that the way that leadership looks like today, which is kind of the same as it was in 2017, very transactional, right? The leader's job is to be there, tell people what to do, watch the team do the job, and really like success is based on hours at work working. And that, what the study kind of uncovered is that women really actually want to lead, but they don't want to lead in that way. And so that kind of was the start of my journey of realizing and learning kind of what is happening right now. And that kind of went on a long journey. I went on a very long journey, did lots of research, but really kind of like the principle that is the foundation of ambition theory, which is my company. And so that's really like why the company is called Ambition Theory, because I was so inspired. It was like the study was called like Women's Ambition and What's Happening. And what I learned is that naturally men are more transactional. So transactional versus transformational leadership. So transactional is that top down traditional approach. Transformational is more collaborative, based on trust, setting a vision, inviting people in. Research shows, and we've done research on this in construction industry, but also other researchers have studied this in other industries. Men are naturally more transactional, women are naturally more transformational. And in construction, in industries where there's more men than women, that dominant leadership style that gets rewarded, that gets reinforced, that how do I decide who gets the promotion to the leadership role, is based on that transactional model. So years of experience, hours working, ability to supervise, give that feedback. And women have these wonderful transformational skills that can inspire people, give that collaboration. And there isn't right now like a checkbox to say check. Motivates the team, check. Can really inspire the team to overcome challenges and motivates the team in a different way. We don't measure that. And so what ends up happening is the path to leadership is a lot harder
Mhm.
for women. And
I
so,
love, yeah, I love that. I was actually just having a conversation with a female friend peer in the industry, and she's in an executive role, and she kind of keeps getting skipped for these executive promotions. And to your point, the leadership that's making these decisions to promote, they're men, and they are, I think, to your point, transactional and not having that ability to kind of look out at a broader spectrum of the impact that they're making. They're like, she may not be a people manager, like that's just one thing that she's not really good at. So they were like, oh well, until you cultivate that skill and prove that, then you can't be an executive yet, right? So there's just like these little check boxes that they have to check, rather than looking at the way that she works a room, the way that she's able to get people to collaborate. Like maybe she's not a people manager, but look at what she just empowered 10 men to be able to accomplish something that don't even report to her. So
yeah, I will say she is a people manager, but it's a different definition. She's influencing those people and she's not relying on like the org chart to get them to do stuff, which is really interesting in that like we just knowledge, okay, where's my org chart? What am I telling them to do and what are they doing? And that's how we define
yeah,
people management.
my
Yes, you're
and the advice I gave her, and Lori, maybe you can add to this too, is I just told her to flip the script. When you're in your performance review, they're going off a checklist. You got to flip that script and you got to say, I know you've got those little check boxes over there, but I'm doing things that are outside of that. So maybe Lori, what advice would you give to women and men who are in these roles where they can actually be our allies and use those leadership positions to promote more female leadership? What advice would you give to both sides?
Well, I love the examples that you all gave, and what I would say is those guys, what they don't know perhaps is that the code is you don't act like us, and you don't get results like us. That's what you were talking about, Andrea. And so you have to be really pointedly clear in the kind of results that get what you're looking for at that company, and be able to point it out to them in ways that they can receive it. So you have to almost speak their language. There is a different language. I don't know that I can put that in research terms, but the men do have that particular way of seeing what works and what doesn't. And it's what they're comfortable with, and it's the male way of doing things. And so when a woman is able to get results in a different way, they don't always aren't able to see it. So I would tell her to do that, to be really clear and also hold their feet to the fire. I can think of examples where I was with a community of leaders and I was their HR person at that time, and they had gone to extensive work to lay out what the organization leadership should look like and what they were going to measure for people. And they communicated it clearly. And at the end of the year, in the room, looking at who was on the top of the pile versus not on the top of the pile, the guy that left the dead bodies was on the top of the pile because he'd got great technical results. And I sat there in complete disbelief, like, wow, where's your integrity? I was judging them left and right. What's going on? Why are you giving that guy the top rewards? And I had to talk them through it and say, this is what you said. This is what you communicated. This is what you need to do. And holding him in the highest position is absolutely the opposite of what you said you were going to do. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to say things or do you want to actually practice them? So, it's I was in a position to hold them accountable to that. And they were very upset with me because it took like an extra 3 hours on a Saturday to get that done. But when they got done, they were in integrity. And I said, you can go out and be proud of those results. And yeah, you're going to have a tough conversation with that guy that gets great results, but doesn't follow the things that you outlined in terms of success in this organization. Not being as direct as that perhaps with those other managers, but pointing out where she got results and the how isn't as important as she got them and being able to show them what those are and what they look like and why they're important.
Yeah, I think those are really great points that you're bringing up because one of the, well, not only just some of the studies that I've read and even some of the feedback that I've been given, and Mara and you and I were even talking about around like women speaking. We don't have enough women on panels. We don't have enough women in leadership. We don't have enough women. We don't have enough women in these roles. And what we were finding was it came back to a confidence thing.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't confident enough in themselves to go put themselves in front of other people and speak.
Yeah.
They weren't confident enough they felt like they had to go check more boxes before they put themselves forward for those promotions. The
It's the
men,
same thing that happens when they apply for a job. They don't, they won't speak for the same reasons as they won't apply for a job. But so, Andrea, I don't know if you have any experience with actually when you're going through this in your careers, because I think there's men and women on both sides of the fence that could benefit from this, where you're just getting frustrated, like you're seeing the results, you can track it, you know your success, you especially know where you've grown and where you've came, but we have that insight, and it's not always easy for our managers and directors and folks around us to see that. So what advice would you give them as they're kind of working through those challenges?
I think it's like Lori said, like really look at the results. And I will say, like in our coaching programs, people get really amazing results. Like they close deals, they bring in new clients, they make sales, they kind of get their subcontractors over a big problem. And a lot of times when I ask them about it, they're like, I just call, like they undervalue what they actually did to get to the result. And so kind of like what we do is I like really try to get a tangible outcome. And I because the outcome will speak louder than the input. Because when if you think about how like men measure success, like you talked about, Val, it's all in the input. I called 4 times, I worked 80 hours, I did this and this and this. It's like, way to go, like pat on the back, great job. Whereas a woman would take a completely different approach and her outcome could actually be better. But I think what we do is like, oh, I just called some people. I like bought them some coffee and you undervalue that as input. You undervalue your transformational leadership skills, which are really gets the team moving all in the same direction. And so I think it's really recognizing it's actually not about the input, it's about the outcome. And so looking like what is the effect on the bottom line? Like what is the effect on the project schedule? Like how much did it cost because we didn't have we were able to overcome this problem that would have had a 1 week delay? Like how much money did we save? And really start with that. And then people will be open to the like, oh, how did she do that? There might be something there. And then you're kind of like giving them that opportunity to learn about these transformational leadership skills that men have as well too. It's not like a men versus women. It's like men can be transformational too, but it's just not a muscle that we reward, train in this industry. So that's what I would say for people really. And it might take longer. It might be hard for you to look at it that way, but just sit in the discomfort and you'll figure out what that outcome is and then share it and see what happens.
Yeah, and you know what we're talking about, ladies, is the conditioning that women get all along the way. From the time that we're little, the conditioning that don't brag, don't be too arrogant, don't be too, they don't use the word confident, but that's really what they're saying because confidence is not respected and revered the same way for women as it is for men. It's expected for men. And so we have all kinds of social and other criteria that get conditioned into us that we're not even aware of, which is why we can't speak like you're talking about, Andrea, with confidence to what we did. And in fact, sometimes we get punished. I can think of examples at work where I was punished for what I call working around the system because the system was the rock in the river that the water was pounding and the water could keep pounding it and the rock wasn't going to move or the water could go around. And I worked on being the water that went around and got the result. And it was all with integrity, but it wasn't revered and it wasn't seen. And I got in trouble for it many times
Yeah,
as a woman. It was
Valerie and
crazy.
I talked about that. Confidence comes across as aggressiveness when it's a female.
aggressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have a quantitative research study around that. So we actually asked women in construction what feedback they get about their leadership skills, and 78% were told you need to be more confident, but 70% were told they needed to be less bossy. And it's really like this double bind tightrope that you have to walk because women are expected to be collaborative and nice in
Nice. And
society.
smile.
Leaders are supposed to be assertive and confident in society, but when a woman shows up as like collaborative and caring, it's like, oh, she doesn't have what it takes to be a leader. But then if she shows up as assertive and acts exactly like how men act in her organization, it's like, oh, she's too bossy, another B
It's too
word,
much.
or too
Mhm.
much. You got to tone it down. So this idea of like even getting feedback that's tangible and actionable is really hard for women, because you have to really take it with a grain of salt and interpret it in a way that's going to work for you. Because if you kind of listen too much, then you're going to, if you sway one way, you lose. If you sway the other way, you lose too. So you really have to be careful, and it's challenging.
And
It's the
Lori,
Fleetwood Mac song.
and Lori, I love that you just said that comment. I think you said it as smile. You need to smile more. I can't tell you how many men
Uh-huh.
said that to me, and I'm like, and it didn't. I think Valerie. I don't remember, somebody else said it on one of our episodes, but it just hit me recently over this recording these episodes. Is I've had that said to me a lot, and you need to, but I haven't really heard anyone say that to a man. I don't think I've
No.
ever heard that, and I don't know what drives that. I don't know. For any listeners, you realize you're in a situation where you're being called aggressive or too assertive, and you're actually problem solving or something to the effect of confidence. What can you do in that moment, and or through that middle of that project or opportunity to get through and bring some resolution and resolve that?
That's a loaded question,
It
Mara.
is. It is. I like to ask the loaded questions.
I would say, like, in the moment, there's not that much you can do, because what happens is sometimes there's like, either you're probably gonna have two natural reactions. You're gonna like retreat and be like, okay, yeah, they're right. I should just not engage for the rest of the meeting. Or it's gonna fire up this like anger and you're gonna like blank. And neither of those behaviors are gonna lead to an amazing outcome. So I think part of it is like pause, take a breath, and really like give yourself like a couple seconds before you move on. And really like that pause will help you figure out, like, am I going to continue in this conversation? Is there someone in this room that could I could signal to, or some like make eye contact with someone and they could like challenge this? Because sometimes challenging it yourself doesn't, in the moment, it may not.
And what if it's a work stream? This is activities over a course of time and you're problem solving. Valerie, I know you've been in situations like that where you had a solution and you just couldn't get everyone on board. And then you might 2 years later see a LinkedIn post that actually shows that solution that you talked about. So how do we get more on board and get through that? Is there any advice that you could give, Lori or Andrea?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Andrea said. Is you've got to pause, because the initial reactions of any human are usually not going to help the situation. And depending whether it's a group or one-on-one, one is to be able to acknowledge, say, wow, I appreciate that feedback, and I need to contemplate that a little bit. Can we talk about this later today, tomorrow, next week, etc.? Push it out if you need the time. If you don't need the time and you're able to take those breaths and get your frontal lobe back online by oxygenating it with that breath, it's get curious. Oh, wow, I've never been told that before. Tell me what it is that you see that that isn't working. Can you give me a little more behind that? What How might I adjust that to make it work better for you? Because what I'm over here seeing is this, this, and this, but I'm not sure what you're seeing. Make them operationalize it, but not from a defensive place, from a place of curiosity. And that's a lot easier than it sounds, because like Andrea said, you're going to be you're gonna have an emotional reaction, and who wouldn't?
I
And
like
most women are more likely to. So if you can buy yourself some time, if that's what you need to do to really integrate and calm down, get curious, ask questions, have them operationalize it would be what I would suggest.
What I have a Mara, I have a deeper long-term solution for you. And this is not in the moment. This takes some like work behind the scenes, but the way that we do it in our programs is like the antidote to this is authenticity. And I know it's a buzzword. You're like, everyone says be authentic at work. Like, what does that even mean? But the idea of like when you do get that backlash, it's usually because someone else's spidey sense, their emotional intelligence is like, ooh, something's off. So if you are being called too aggressive, it is likely because you're trying to behave like something
Oh
that you
man.
aren't. Like you're modeling the behaviors of everybody else on the project. And when you act that way, but you look a certain way and there's expectations around that, it's like other people's spidey senses are going up. So it's not even like they're a bad person, they don't support women. Like usually that is like 99.9% of the time that is not the case. It is their like unconscious like gut feel that like, ooh, something's wrong about this situation. And it's because you're not like actually being authentic in the way you're behaving. And so how do you overcome that? Is again, it's another loaded question, but the way that we do it is we really look at people's strengths. So we what you do, and you can do this on yourself, you can get really curious about like when I'm at my best, when I'm leading in my best way, when I'm influencing in my best way, what what am I doing? How are people reacting? And then what you need to do is just like really ground in yourself and then start behaving in a way that is authentic to yourself. And so how we do that is we do a 360 survey around people and we ask people on that project team, what does it feel like to work with Val? What value does Val bring to the project? And when you can see that the way other people perceive you, you can take that. And it's a great reminder that, like, I actually bring something different to the table. So instead of talking like, presenting this information like everybody else's, it kind of reminds you that if you say it a different way or you have a different perspective, it's going to add value. And so it gives you that confidence, again, to show up. And I know I hate the word authentic, it's such a
No, I
buzzword,
like
but it really allows you to show up in your own skin, adding like the real value that you have based on your experience. And it's different from everybody else. If you're in a team, it's like you don't want everyone to say the same thing over and over again. You actually kind of want a different opinion to help the team move to that newest solution. So that is, I feel like that for us, that's the longer term solution to overcome that double bind. Does
Yep.
that
I
help?
love it.
that.
I love
Absolutely.
all of that.
Yeah, Andrew, you said something that made me really just pause just now, and you mentioned they see me as a woman, right? And when they first see me, they see me as maybe the soft, gentle presence, right? And then when I have to get assertive to get my point across or what I can feel myself getting worked up. So to your point, when they see me verbalizing and maybe even showing some male energy is what we keep hearing now. But if I'm in my male energy, and I start to sense that's not being received well, that pause and maybe maybe because you're right, we need to be authentic. I don't need to change who I am, but be authentic, pause, and I like Lori's advice of getting curious. I think that
Mhm.
de-escalates, that softens my energy, right? I'm just going to put it back on them. All right. Rather than keeping to prove my point, get curious. So those are all really, really good points. Thank you.
Yeah, one really interesting example though. So we had a client and she started out as like an admin assistant and then she moved her way up to like a senior project manager. And when she talks about her journey, she's like, I used to think she called soft skills. She'd be like, I thought I would hide them. Like I didn't think they were good. I would always like try to sharpen the technical skills. And she moved really, really quickly through the ranks. And it was really because she had emotional intelligence, could influence, could negotiate, all these transformational leadership skills. So I hate the word soft skills. It's like for
I
me,
do
it's
too.
transformational leadership
I'm
skills.
with you.
But was really interesting, she said she described this time she was in a meeting and it was like, I think she was still a project coordinator at the time, and there was a change order, and everybody had their turn around the table to say what they thought. And every single person agreed with the change order. And she was last, and she really did not agree with it. So, like, every single person had said this was it. And she just freaking brought it to the table. She, like, said it, she said in a really aggressive way that she didn't agree with it. And this is what I think we should do. And because she was transformational in her everyday behavior and they expected her to be that way, they looked to her for leadership when stuff needed to get done and she showed up with that like you would call it male energy. They're like, she must be serious. And so it actually really worked in her favor. And it's really like, that's such a great example when I think of that story of like, what does it look like to be authentic? She was so authentic in that moment. And it actually really worked really, really well. It like better for the company, better for the owner. And really, it kind of like helped her to get to, I think that was what got her to be promoted to a project manager, because the like her manager was like, the way I saw you take charge today, that is what I need to know that you have the capacity to do that. So she needed to show some of those transactional behaviors and the transformational in order to build that trust that like, if I'm not micromanaging you, you got that, you have the company's back, you can make decisions and get people on board. So
I think that's a great example.
it's a really cool story, but it's not black and white. Like I wish there was a script that was like, if this happens, this is what you
Do this.
say, but it's not that simple.
Yeah, and I think I would challenge our listeners to think of women that they've worked for that have done what you were talking about, Andrea, that have challenged the way the male operation works and yet been successful. Because I would bet we all have an example. I can think of several. I can also think of the many men, women that I didn't respect and didn't work well with, that, and they were very successful, some of them as well, copying the transactional way. But I think it's really good to think about where are some of the women role models in your life and in work or wherever that have been able to be more of themselves and yet be successful? And that, because we need to see what those role models are and be able to emulate that and become one ourselves.
That's right.
I think we could
So
translate all of this into dating advice, relationship advice,
Mhm.
marriage advice. It all relates. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. So I have a question for Andrea. In construction and mission critical environments, we often see diversity programs, and they're really siloed, right? And especially when they're focused only on the women. What have you learned about making gender equity a shared responsibility, and what systems do you see working?
Okay, this is a great question and it's very timely. So when where we start, like Ambition Theory started offering leadership development programs for women in construction. And so we've done this for many years. They're very great. Women get promoted, they level up in their leadership. But what we learned very quickly, probably in like the first 6 months of doing this, is that it's like to change the women or do you change the environment? And I think a lot of resources up until like maybe like even 2 years ago, all the resources were poured into the change the woman. It's like the chicken or the egg scenario. And what kind of I think the industry wasn't open to the change the system conversation even like 3 years ago, maybe, yeah, about 3 years ago. I think the tables started to turn a little bit. And so the way that we were able to navigate it early on, before the industry was ready for that, was this concept of sponsorship versus mentorship. And so really interesting. Quickly, I'll explain it. Mentorship, everyone's told get a mentor. It's baked into the industry, how you rise, all of those things. Mentorship is advice based. So you should do this. This is how I did it. But at the end of the day, you as the mentee have to find the opportunity. Sponsorship is opportunity based. You need to level up. You need to you've only managed a $50 million project. You need to be on a $100 million project. That's the skill. And sponsorship is finding the way to get you there. So what we need to do, so what we were able to do and to really engage everybody in that conversation is, and so I guess what our research shows is that women are naturally mentored, men are naturally sponsored. We call it all mentorship. And it's not on purpose. It's, I want her to be successful. I want her to be ready. I don't want her to fail. So women are just prepared, take a course, here's some advice, wait for the opportunity, be 100% ready so that when it comes, you can do it. Whereas men are like, oh, you want to try the $100 million project? Sure. Here you go. We're aligning work next week. We'll put you on it. And you know what? I'll make sure I tell the project director that you're new to just make sure and set you up for success. So that's the difference. And what we were able to do, kind of even starting like 5, 6 years ago, was teach everybody about sponsorship. And people really picked it up. They're like, wow, this is amazing. This actually benefits me. I can have someone, I can give them an opportunity, they can grow. but actually they will have my back too. So they will be out there sharing information with me, helping me. If I got to execute something, they will have my back. And it's been this thing that everybody really, really grasps. So that is how we did it kind of up until, like, I guess 2 years ago. But the really interesting thing right now is, actually, I had this conversation this morning with somebody, and I'm like, what do owners of construction companies, what are they worried about? And they said, people aren't putting their hand up for leadership. So that same insight that I learned about why women do not want that job, because it's based on this transactional job description. Younger people do not want that. They don't want to work 80-hour weeks. They want to be collaborative. They want to trust. They don't want to be supervising. And so I think this has opened up a new opportunity for us at Ambition Theory to really bring transformational leadership into the construction industry and show people how to do it.
Awesome. I love that. And I think this is a hearing about not taking the leap and not wanting to take the leap or not having the opportunity to take that leap. I sometimes think it goes back to a little bit of the networking, even internally, opportunities, and how we're changing the internal networking opportunities that really exclude women sometimes. And I know, Mara, you and I have talked about this, where the hunting trips, the golf trips, the things that would really wouldn't make it comfortable for a female to go along, and frankly, they're not invited. And so really thinking about, how can I do things inside our business that are more inclusive rather than exclusive? And I love that. And I think it's a great way to kind of segue back to Lori. Now you work with women who are already successful and who are already there. So now we're talking about not taking the leap or not getting the role. But now let's move into the folks who have. And but they're still feeling that, I know, that disconnect, or they're overwhelmed in those high pressure fields like data centers and critical infrastructure, which is a huge, highly high pressure field. How do you help leaders reconnect with themselves without really compromising their impact?
This is going to sound simple, and it's simple to say, not simple to do, but it I work with women to get really clear on their priorities, because women tend to take on too much. They want to do everything for everybody. They sometimes don't delegate well. And as the more senior you get, they're forced, but they still want to do too much. So it's getting really clear, clarify, and then communicate the heck out of it. Make sure you've got your upper management on board, your peers on board, and you tell your team so they don't keep coming to you with all the little things that they would normally come to you and you would probably do. So a ton of clarity, communication, and then really looking at, what do I need to be most effective? Because women are terrible at that. If I were to generalize, we just keep going until we drop over. And what I hear inside your industry is exhaustion, and I'm burnt out, and I don't know what to do. There's just more than I can handle. So it's that getting really crisp and clear about what you can and can't do, doing it, communicating it, and then, how do I take care of myself? I make them put strategic time on their calendar. I don't make them. I ask them. I invite them to put strategic reflection time, because one of the things is, in a fast-paced environment, it's move, 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 move. There's very little time to think and be strategic. And when they get to that level, if they're not doing that, it's a disservice to the organization, the industry, to everybody. And they've got that skill set, so they need to do that as well and take the time that they need. I've got women that I coach that haven't had a vacation in 7 months, sometimes longer. It's like, you need to take some real time away and disconnect. Put someone in charge, tell them what you expect, what they need to do, be really, again, clear, and set boundaries, and don't look at your phone, don't pick it up, don't respond to that email, and tell your boss, maybe the CEO, the same thing. Listen, I'm disconnecting. If you need something, this person is well equipped to handle it. Call them, don't call me. That's a tough thing to do.
I completely agree, because you feel like, for us women in this world, construction, infrastructure, high tech, high pressure, we do. I mean, I can't think of a time where I wasn't working 60 to 80 hours a week. And you're just trying to keep up, and you're doing. And so I think that's a really great way for the allies to kind of check in with their female counterparts and just say, hey, making sure they're not doing too much, and how the leadership or executive leadership above them maybe can check in and say, what's on your plate and how can we take some of that off? Because on top of all of that, we're still trying to manage homes. We're still trying to balance families. We're still trying to do all the things. And we will, at the sacrifice of our own health, our own sleep, our own everything, we will sacrifice ourselves before we jump in. And I'm not saying that men won't do that or don't do that, but I do find that women will go to the point of absolute burnout and exhaustion, and their counterparts might have a spouse at home who's just maybe a stay-at-home mom who really takes that other load off of them, and versus someone who is a female who likely has two working parents who are trying to split the load and trying to do all the work. It's a lot of extra pressure. And so just trying to speak back to just sort of that work-life balance across the board, I think means a lot as well. So I think that was just a really great advice.
Well,
I know we're coming up to the end. Are we ready to drop that audacious question?
Yeah, and this is, I guess we want to ask this to Lori first, and maybe Andrea can answer it next. But, if you had the ability to come in and working with a client or a partner and redesign leadership from the ground up in these mission critical environments and get rid of some of the limitations that are there, what would be the first bold change? Because sometimes we go in and we know what needs to happen, but we do it in a very lighthearted way, very passive way, so that one, we can get the deal, or we can actually they'll still talk to us. But what types of things would you do day one if you could do it without any pushback?
Well, I'd have 51% women running the place, but that's probably not real realistic. Good women. So I think a lot of the things that we've talked about already are really relevant. So being able to have women that know what the pressure is and know what they need to do to release it. And instead of creating an overly toxic competitive environment, which when you're running at high pressure and deadline, if this thing doesn't get up, we lose millions of dollars, we start to allow sloppy, crappy, horrible, toxic behavior to run the place. And so I think being able to come back to that more emotionally intelligent way of leading, more transformational, more true to who you are, rather than following the old model of drive, and do it till you drop, doesn't work. So it's shifting. All right, how are we going to? I'll give you an example. I have a senior executive that has only men on her team that report to her. And so she's really noticing how they come to her for everything. I need an answer, I go to the boss. So she doesn't want to micromanage. She wants to be that more collaborative, emotionally intelligent leader. And I said, so do that, but tell them that's what you're doing. Tell them, don't come to me with this. I trust you to make a decision. And if you need some boundaries or clarification about what those results need to look like, I am happy to provide that for you, but don't shift back to the tell way of being when that's not what you're best at. That's what they want because that's what they've been trained in. That's how the culture works when you're living in a patriarchy, all those things. Don't succumb to it, and tell them why you're not doing that and that you're doing it. What else? I think that collaborative piece is huge, moving away from what success is defined as versus individual contribution, because men want to compete. I mean, that's how they've been conditioned and trained. And again, they're not bad. We love men. Okay. We need them. But some of the ways that they have been trained and taught are no longer as relevant as they used to be. The world is starting to shift. And we need to use those skills and talents that are uniquely ours as women and bring that to the party. I think I'm going to stop there. There's probably more I could say, but I know Andrea's got probably some really good stuff to add.
Yeah, for me, it is really simple. I would teach people the difference between transactional and transformational leadership on day one, because in these industries in construction, data centers, infrastructure, there are already a lot of robust procedures that have been tested, retested, tweaks over the years. And where people are trained is like more like training on how to use the procedure in a transactional way. And they kind of in their mind, they think that's leadership, right? It's like, someone sent an email because someone didn't do their part. I'll just reply all and say, hey, who is going to do this? And realizing that actually there could be a transformational intervention that you could do in those situations. Like, what's the big picture here? What could be causing the block? Use that curiosity. So, really start people from day one, understanding and training them on the value of transformational leadership and transactional leadership as a spectrum. So, that's what I would do.
I love that. And I think that that kind of leads into our call to action to our listeners and really challenging them to go this week after you've listened to this, to go look around and ask yourself, how am I contributing to the culture where women don't have to lead the charge alone? So we have a lot of good nuggets that we've talked about today and tools that you can put in your belt to start practicing, and an amazing executive coach and an ambition theory expert who you can bring in to support you and drive that. So thank you both today for coming on the show and being with us. We really appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you.